Welcome to Recruitment Interviews by the Power Hive. Today we're talking about building a high-performing culture. We've got a specialist in that area, Alison, who's going to be talking to us about building an L&D culture within your business. I'm really excited to have Alison on board.
Thank you, Sean.
Done a lot of work with the Power Hive over the years, personally done some really good things with Insight, and we know she's been an expert in the L&D side of things as well. So, Alison, big topic to talk about. How important would you say a learning culture is to have within a business?
Gosh, well, it's almost impossible to overstate its importance, and particularly, I think at the present time, we've got a situation which is in rapid change, and the ability to adapt is sort of synonymous with the ability to learn, isn't it?
Yep.
So being really in tune with how people learn most effectively, what delivers business results, and keeping everybody with that sort of forward momentum of development, I think is really, really important in the current time. But it always has been, you know, and it's been a big theme of my entire career, learning and development. I did a postgrad diploma in learning and development years ago, but I've always kept my learning and development work very, very closely aligned to the P&L of the business. So, you know, I've switched from, back last century. I was national UK head of learning and development for Hayes, and then after that for Robert Half. But I was also an operating director with P&L responsibility. And I think that's really quite key to how I became an MD in the end, because without that focus, it's really easy for L&D to become a little bit separate from the business, a little bit academic and ideal, you know, rather than real world, if you like.
Of course, and that links in with the results and return of investment side of things, as you say. If sometimes in my experience it can be seen like, okay, trainings are nice to have, but what's the pull through in terms of return on investment? Are we going to see, you know, I go out on this nice training course, come back to the office, how does that impact the bottom line essentially? So how have you managed to weave that into the business?
Right. Well, you've hit there, Sean, on something that I think is a really common issue in the recruitment industry. And one of the things I learned all those years ago when I did that postgrad diploma was about levels of evaluation and implementation. So in my view, it's absolutely essential when you're thinking about what learning and development do we want in this business, get rid of any of those ideas about offering a sort of menu of training courses, and think, what do we actually need people to be delivering? Because that's what effective learning is. It's not about what people know or what you're interested in teaching them, which can be, you know, another thing. It's actually about what behaviours you want to change. And so you need to start first of all with what are the results we're trying to achieve here, and then map backwards to, okay, so what behaviours do we reasonably believe will achieve those results if they're implemented effectively, and then map back to, now, how are we going to teach those so that people are persuaded to use them? Because if you think about the sort of gravitational pull that you get with habits, so if you've got a team full of recruiters who have had success in previous years by doing things one way, that's the gravitational pull then, isn't it, for them to keep doing that? And when you're pulling against gravity, you've really got to persuade people as well as show them how, haven't you? So there's a sell element as well as an explain element. So there's these different, as I say, levels of goals toward implementation. And it's important before you ask people to set aside time, go away from the desk, that you're very clear in your own mind how you're going to measure what's been retained, what's been turned into behaviours, and then what's been turned into money, in short, because that is what we're in business for.
100%.
If you have those things clear in your head, then how you teach and what you teach, if that's the right word, becomes much, much clearer. So to give you an example, when I've designed, a whole big bespoke foundation programs for recruitment businesses, I've always started with I've always produced for the managers a sort of checklist, a simple tool to help them assess and implement the learning. Okay. So we move from what people will recognise, that situation where a manager goes, and how was your training course? And the recruiter goes, it was a nice day out, thank you. And they go, okay, good, well, tick, well received.
Training manual goes in the drawer.
Exactly. If we move from that to the manager saying, right now, you tell me what you learned. Now, let's listen in, let's do some calls together. I want to hear you using that technique. And I want to hear you using it in a range of situations so that it becomes a new habit. And at that point, the manager can say, yep, this person's implemented, evaluated enough for it to start to be a new habit. So that's an ideal situation. You can use it for anything that's core, like foundation training and so forth. And the business impacts that would have with foundation training are about obviously how quickly you can get people profitable, time to deal, how productive they are in their first year, and indeed staff attrition as well. So
which we're all trying to impact at the moment, 100%. And you've worked in different type of businesses, as you say, Hayes, Robert Half, really big corporate environments. Liquid maybe somewhere in between, or certainly wasn't that when you started there. And obviously you work with both small, medium, large size businesses now as an NED. How do you thinking about different resources, different approaches, is there any common trends to building a learning culture within a business, dependent the size, the sector? What are the things that you've learned in your time from those?
Oh, that's a big question. So I think first point is the critical importance of involving everybody in the organisation in learning from top to bottom. So don't assume that because someone's got a title and been doing recruitment for a few years that they can do the way you want it done now, or the way that the market needs it to be done. And if you go back to like a board meeting, when a business decision is made, one of the questions that should always be there is there a learning and development need that springs from this? Okay. It may not be. It may be simply a communication need, or we need to change a process, something along those lines, or an incentive. But ask yourself the question, right, if I was to hand out £1,000 to everybody and just say, just do it for me, would they know how to do this new thing?
It's a good way to look at it.
And if the answer is no, they still wouldn't, even though they were panting for that £1,000, then there is a learning and development need, isn't there? So pretty much any major change I've made in a business has had a learning and development requirement to make it really work. But remember that is part of a process. This single event doesn't do the job, does it? So then we get back into sort of milestones. To go back to your question, which was how do you build that whole culture? I think there's a really important role for managers in terms of, reiterating the learning, making sure that people have understood it and are implementing it correctly, but also informing it. So I was with a company just last week, actually, and they had formally had a member of staff develop a training program, but that person wasn't hands-on enough in the business to write realistic case studies or to role play in a realistic way. So what that person has done is they tried to get all the skills practice, if you like, put into another context, one that was simple to understand, but the learning transference from that into real life was really low, because the person who'd written this had created was a simple world. Now we know, don't we?
Recruitment's not a simple world.
It is not.
Definitely not.
And there are always lots of moving parts in the recruitment picture. Not least our sort of two customer groups, if you will, and therefore every sort of principle this lady had been trying to impart fell apart when they said, but it doesn't work like that in recruitment, or there might be this complication or that complication.
Yeah.
So nothing was getting implemented.
Right.
So I think there's a really important role for managers in making sure that everything's detailed and real.
Yeah.
You know, if you're using case studies, for
Yeah.
example, and that they've thought they can also input to, okay, well, if you want people to learn that, then there's an issue around the practicalities of the system.
Yeah.
For example, or how we the processes we need to support that learning. And third, in an ideal world, I'm a huge fan of training your own people to be trainers.
Right.
Now, I know lots and lots of businesses who use their own staff to do like lunch and learn type things.
Yeah.
Just a couple of notes of caution on that. Number one, an awful lot of those, it's more about the lunch than the learn. And there's no implementation plan, no sets of measures. Number two is that there's a great tendency for people to pull out the interesting story. So here's an example. Someone I know asked a very experienced, very successful recruiter to speak to the rest of the staff about thorough interviewing of candidates. And this person built an entire session around the fact that by having a chat with a candidate, they found out that this person was a real national trust enthusiast and had subsequently decided to spec them in there and made a placement. Right. Well,
so that transferable really.
It's not. The issue there is that the only reason that person was telling the story is because it was so rare. So it's not actually that useful a learning point. So if you are going to engage, use experienced staff to help train, you need to agree on what they're going to train. Because otherwise the focus is all on that story, which is the 1% exception, rather than the 99% of situations that people will actually encourage. So there's that. And then I think there's another point.